Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous territories, that of the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron, and maybe other nations before that. As you've heard, tonight's talk is sponsored by the Socialist Project and the Center for Social Justice. The Center for Social Justice relies on charitable donations to do its work, doing talks and research and such. So if anyone wants to contribute, there's donor cards in the back. You can contribute monthly or one time. There are different cards for that. You can also do it online at socialjustice.org. And I'm going to hand it over to Leo, who will be chairing the meeting tonight.
Great. Thanks, Lana. What Robert didn't say is that the best olive oil in Canada, that's available in Canada, is sold here, and it would be wise to leave with a bottle of the olive oil. But pay for it, please. My name is Leo Panitch. I'm chairing, substituting for Natalie Mera, who was going to chair tonight, but the Ontario Health Coalition has issued a report today which is going to get a lot of media attention tomorrow. And she is preparing tonight for all of that media attention, so couldn't be here. This meeting was conceived because it is 3 decades since the 2 great victories of the Canadian feminist movement occurred in the mid-1980s. The victory around the struggle for equal pay for work of equal value, or pay equity and workplace equity as it's become known. And of course, just before that, the remarkable struggle that led to the victory against the abortion laws in the criminal code, the victory on reproductive rights for women. And what was so important and distinctive about those victories in the mid-1980s was that they were mobilization struggles, they were education struggles, but they connected to struggles inside the legal system. And they were sealed by juridical victories in the state. They couldn't have happened without the mobilization, without the movement. But they were sealed through people working inside the legal system and inside the state. And the second aspect that was so important, and that many of us think has been forgotten, is that they were both victories, and this was quite distinctive to Ontario, that were led by women, but aided by an alliance with the labor movement. And a lot of the criticism that the labor movement often gets in this respect is deserved. But what has been forgotten are those important alliances around these 2 victories. And we felt that it needs to be brought back, looked at not in a starry-eyed way in terms of what lessons can be gained, and have some reflection on where things stand today and how a new generation or new generations of women engaged in feminist struggles are able to build on this and go beyond it. And to that point, we brought together 4 women who'd be able to do this. Speaking first will be Carolyn Egan, who was a founding member of the Ontario Coalition for Abortion Clinics, which was at the heart of the campaign to overturn the federal abortion law. I remember very well the many protests that she led in that period. She remains very active in the struggle, is president of the Steelworker Toronto Area Council, member of the Labour Council, well known on the left of Toronto.
Thanks very much, Leo, and thanks to everyone who put this together, Lana and all, Leo. So as Leo said, an historic battle took place in this country in the late 20th century between the women's movement, its allies, and the Canadian state. And a major victory was won when the Supreme Court of Canada overturned the federal abortion law in January of 1988. In that time, we had tried to situate that campaign in the broader context of reproductive freedom. And abortion rights was seen as one of a number of demands the women's movement was struggling for. Before the law was struck down, and those of you my age will remember that there was access to abortion, but it was very privileged access. In 1969, legislation had been passed which allowed abortion to be performed if they took place in an accredited or approved hospital with the consent of a therapeutic abortion committee. The committee was made up of 3 doctors, none of whom would have met the patient, and they made the determination whether continuation of pregnancy would impact on the physical or mental health of the woman. If they decided it did, the woman was able to have an abortion. If they didn't, she wasn't. There was uneven interpretation of the law across the country, and many hospitals didn't even establish committees. The law was unjust and denied women the right to make decisions over their own reproductive health. Now in practice, obviously, it resulted, as I mentioned, in very inequitable access. Women with economic resources who could afford a private gynecologist or travel to the US could get an abortion. Many racialized women, First Nations women, working class women, young women, rural women were denied, in spite of the fact that Canada supposedly had a 2-tiered health system. Now in Toronto, women from the Immigrant Women's Health Centre, Hassle-Free Clinic, and the clinic I worked decided we had to challenge the system that was denying abortion to so many who were making that decision. Because people spoke every day to women who were being treated in a humiliating, degrading manner and made to leap through all kinds of hoops. And those women who came together from those 3 clinics felt strongly that the federal law was fundamentally flawed, and that firstly it took the decision out of the hands of women, and that it was racist and class bias in its application. They and others, and obviously Judy Rebick is in the room here, and others of you, formed the Ontario Coalition for Abortion Clinics in '82. Now the group thought long and hard. Many of us were veterans of other struggles, women's movement, student struggles, anti-war struggles, and we looked at the situation in the province of Quebec, where community health centers, women's health centers, were providing abortions to women in their communities. And it was clear to us that there were 2 things: a doctor who was willing to challenge the law, and a broad and representative movement, including the labor movement, that was willing to fight for the necessary changes. Now OCAC was very much a grassroots activist organization, a united front, if you want to use Marxist or at least Trotskyist terms, I guess. And the immediate objectives were to overturn the federal law and to legalize freestanding clinics, providing medically insured abortion. But we also took a mass action approach. We didn't leave the campaign to the lawyers or to the lobbying of politicians, because we honestly believed in our assessment that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of women and men across the country would come into the streets to fight for this right, for reproductive, broader reproductive freedom. And we worked with the Canadian Abortion Rights Action League, etc. And as Leo mentioned, at the very start, we won a resolution at the Ontario Federation of Labour. It was a tough slog in many senses. Cliff Kilkey was the president, came out on side, and this is hugely important because it brought it outside the women's movement. But also, a group called Women Working with Immigrant Women, a coalition of immigrant and racialized women's organization, Mary's very familiar, was a strong supporter, helping to organize meetings and active support in diverse communities. People like Salome Lucas and Judy Vashti Prasad, many others. And we began to build this broad united front, step by step, and the popular support did grow. Now, the membership set out, as I said, to win full access to free abortion for all women. But OCAC tried to make it clear in its organizing that this has to be a fundamental right for all women to make the decision to terminate their pregnancy. We need fully funded clinics to be in place to do so. But the analysis, and there was a lot of debate around this, went much further, because the group believed that women must also have the right to bear the children they choose to bear. And this is a perspective I learned earlier on from women like Erica Mercer, a black activist in the city, from the Immigrant Women's Health Centre in early attempts to broaden abortion rights and other things. And this was tremendously important, and it very much, at least for most of us, informed the way we built a movement. Because we used the word choice, we did, but we were aware of its limits. Full access to free abortion, as significant as advance it would be, would not guarantee that all women have choices over their lives or having children. And we tried to broaden that definition of choice, stating that women have real choices in our society. We need safe and effective birth control, centers in our own communities, in our own languages, decent jobs, paid parental leave, equal pay for work of equal value, the right to live freely and openly as lesbians, as we termed it then, an end to forced or coerced sterilization, which was particularly affecting women with disabilities and women on First Nations reserves and black women. And we saw these women in our clinics. People who would tell you, yes, the Therapeutic Abortion Committee, my doctor said I could have an abortion, but only if I had sterilized. Anecdotal, but it was there and we knew it. And we felt these were incredibly important things to keep in mind. Now, so what we tried to do, and how successful, you know, it's always a judgment of history, was to see abortion access not in isolation, but as one of a number of independent struggles. And we tried to make this concrete by challenging the forced sterilization that first women, black women, women with disabilities, as I said, were facing. We had forums. Ursula Jacko was a First Nations woman who worked very closely with us, doing forums in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Montreal. These things were tremendously important. We worked very closely with AIDS Action Now, another group where women who were diagnosed with AIDS were having a lot of pressure to be sterilized. We worked very closely with the Midwives Collective, you know, trying to provide women the choices and full access to all kinds of services, so women actually would have the choices that they needed the resources to make the choices that they needed. These are tremendously important. And I was looking back over some of our earliest literature, and Judy, you'll remember that. The choice to have a child can never be free in a society where many women earn so much less than men, in which quality childcare, affordable housing is not available, where inequity and discrimination are systemic. And this type of perspective, which today is referred to as reproductive justice, was vital. Again, how well we did it, that's to be judged, but we tried. And so in 1983, working with Henry Morgentaler, we opened a clinic. It was his clinic, we fought with him, he knew he needed a movement. And the clinic very, very much became a symbol of women's resistance to an unjust law. And a very long campaign began fighting two levels of government and a very organized anti-choice movement. It wasn't simple. Now, when that clinic opened, women were making appointments to go to that clinic, knowing full well that it was an illegal abortion clinic. They faced police surveillance and anti-choice harassment, standing up for what they believed to be true. If those women didn't come, the campaign would not have gotten off the ground. And you know, we've always said they are the real heroines of this movement, because if they didn't choose to frankly do an illegal act and put themselves in jeopardy, the movement wouldn't have taken off in the way it did, I don't think, and I think that's important. Safe houses were established. We had escorts, you know, who would escort women through, so it was never clear who was actually having the abortion. And this was very important. It was very, very broad. And of course it was raided. Doctors Morgentaler, Scott Smalling were arrested, and you know, things moved on. It went into the courts. Not that we necessarily chose it, but we knew it was, and we knew it would, but we're not fools. We have enough political sense. We open a little clinic, they're going to come down on you. But we were prepared for a long, drawn-out campaign. We didn't think it would be as long as it was, but we knew it wouldn't be in a moment. And our goal was to change the balance of power in the country. And while the issue was in the court, and I think this is very important for any movement, because you're often going to run into that situation, the critical task for us to continue mobilizing the strong support we knew that was there for women's reproductive rights, because we didn't believe the judges sit in isolation, you know, whether it be in Toronto or up in the Supreme Court in Ottawa. And we had to show that the law was fundamentally unenforceable and make sure a jury could not convict, even if the doctor said, I did it. I'm guilty, and that's what they did say, but I'm asking you not to convict. So we tried to build a wide campaign through demonstrations, marches, rallies. Thousands participated, speakers from many, many communities. And this movement building was critical. I think our analysis of what we understood as choice, how we placed the issue of abortion within that broader context, and the fact that we tried to build a mass movement, and this was incredibly important. And we understood, and I believe today, that without the active participation and the support of thousands, the change would not have occurred in the way it did. Now, after the raid, we were caught in the courts, as I say, and the state very much tried to demobilize. And people remember this. An Ontario Supreme Court Justice said, he ruled that the federal law was constitutional. He stated the Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects only those rights that are spelled out in law or rooted deeply in our tradition. Well, talk to any woman, and abortion is certainly rooted in women's tradition in this country. But in the actual trial, the jury unanimously rejected this finding and found the doctors innocent. And that was truly, truly remarkable. And we put a huge pressure on Queen's Park, a Liberal government at the time, to allow the clinic to be open, because it had been shut down, all the equipment gone, all that. And the anti-choice were rallying 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we decided, uh-oh. And the movement was ahead of us. They're saying, you got to do something, you got to do something. And so we did. We called a demonstration at Queen's Park. 10,000 came out. 10,000 came out and marched, and they came from auto plants in Oshawa, you know, business people with their cleaner, I remember cleaning, you know, from dry cleaners, healthcare workers, up from the hospitals and university, the students. It was remarkable. So the fact that we had set out to build a visible mass movement which fought together for reproductive freedom was moving us somewhere. Now I appreciate, and I'm sure you all do, the full message was often lost in the media presentations. Obviously most attention was given to the single issue of overturning the federal abortion law. We could have done it better, achieving the best balance between short and long-term goals, between the polemical value of the choice slogan and the constraints of such arguments. You know, these are difficult sometimes. We didn't always make the right decisions. And we were under tremendous pressure with so much at stake. There were many debates about the best way forward, and strategic complexities, dilemmas were not made easier in a movement that was constantly under direct attack from the state and the conservative right. I mean, the doctors were arrested, they were jailed, this is what was going on. Now, we raised our money voluntarily. The labor movement was very helpful, giant garage sales. We never had more than one staff person at the height of it. And man, how we did it, I sometimes wonder. And you know, we openly debated all kinds of questions, which was tremendously important. And at strategic junctures, we, when, you know, trying to figure out where to go, we have broad open meetings, public strategy meetings, so people who couldn't be part of it on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, could come in and we'd work it out. And when the Supreme Court finally overturned the existing abortion law, it was through the strength, I believe, of a broad and representative movement, and it was a collective victory in which tens of thousands feel it's their own victory. And there's many examples I can say as time went on where people felt that when they were trying to close a hospital up in Collingwood, and you had, you know, people from, you know, Indigenous people from Christian Island, and teenage punkers up there, and retirees who fought with us in those days all came out and stopped it. But the thing that was so important, I think, in our strategic battles that went back and forth, we understood that the state was not neutral, was not acting in the interest of women, and this was critical to the success of our campaign. And we believed that a mass movement could change the balance of forces in the interest of all women, and it was key to our success. Now, when the Morgentaler decision was announced, and Judy was down here, I was in Ottawa, thousands spontaneously came out into the street, dancing in the street, and there were rallies all over the country. Freestanding clinics were legalized in Ontario, fully covered by the healthcare system, and clinics started up in other parts of the country. And the other thing, which is not so well known, we also fought free. And so there were many women, less so probably than now, who had no status. And we, through that victory, and this was a Liberal government, established 4 centers in Ontario that you did not need a health card to access abortion. That was huge, huge. And it was a huge breakthrough for women without status. But of course, and we understood this too, it didn't take long for the Conservative government, Mulroney, to start you know, scheming how to introduce legislation to roll all this back, recriminalize. So we launched a campaign, Women Are Not Criminals. And we got wide support, some from groups who didn't support us originally, but did now. And now the Supreme Court made its decision. Obviously the Canadian Labour Congress, the OFL, but also groups like the Canadian Medical Association, you know, we're marching along with the United Church and AIDS Action Now, and you know, all kinds of organizations, eco-socialists, anarchists, you know, everyone was in on the struggle at that point. And these National Days of Action that we were involved in, large numbers came out into the street. But the horror of it too, tragically, during this period when they were trying to put the new law in, and you may remember this, Yvonne Hurwitz, a young woman on Hyde Park, 20 years old, died of a self-induced abortion, because she thought, with all the propaganda out there, that it was still illegal. And it was, I mean, it was horrific. This is in the 1990s. But anyway, during this campaign against the new law and increased access, the anti-choice began what they call it Operation Rescue. They were trying to take on the mantle of the U.S. civil rights movement somehow. It didn't work for them, obviously. But they were blockading clinics physically and verbally harassing women seeking abortions. And the organized defense of the clinic was tremendously important, and we were able to do it. And the chants that we would put out as racist, sexist, anti-gay, born-again bigots go away, you know, putting forward the politics of the movement, and they were never able once to shut down a clinic. Never once, because of the strong community support. They tried their darndest. And again, you could see CAW members at the time, steelworkers, along with, you know, as I say, young anarchists and punks and all that, and it all worked. And because of the strong mobilization, Operation Rescue was stopped, and it speaks again to the strength of the movement and the incredible sense of the need to defend the gains that we had made. And this broad support from every level of society allowed for the defeat of the legislation in the Senate in 1991 after it narrowly passed the House of Commons. One vote, right? One vote. Amazing. Okay, so where are we at now? I think my time is running out. But I don't think there's any doubt we now have that changes have been made. Things are in a better situation, but there's still a lot to be won. We have now over 30 freestanding clinics providing funded abortions. Access is much wider than when the campaign began in the early 1980s. Sexual health services are more widely available. But the fight for reproductive justice is far from over. Whether you look at PEI, where there is no service at all, New Brunswick, where we saw the Morgentaler clinic close, and there was a fight, the Liberal government is now in place there, and they're now saying they're going to broaden access, but you don't see it, and they have not allowed it to be in a clinic, and the clinic has opened under a new auspices. And also the austerity agenda, the hospital amalgamations, the healthcare cuts, these are doing away with reproductive services for women. And women are still being harassed as they try to enter clinics. The Conservative government initially refused to fund Planned Parenthood internationally. There was pressure, but now they fund it, but only in places where abortion is illegal. And we don't have a national child care program. Equal pay for work of equal value is still a dream for many. Employment equity has not been implemented. Systemic racism, sexism, discrimination still exists, and many of the other services women need to have real choices, as I mentioned before, are not there. Private members' bills are being introduced, all of that. We're in a major campaign for RU 486, for example. But support for reproductive justice is strong, and I don't want to go into Annalie's territory here because she'll be talking about it today. And while the overall strategic situation has changed, the lessons of the campaign that was waged still remain relevant. We're open to criticisms, we could have done many things different. But I think the principle and the tactics that we used to create a broad united front for reproductive rights were really important. And the overturning of the federal abortion law and the creation of a network of clinics makes abortion more accessible for women who were previously denied. These were initial and partial victories for sure, but still major gains, as Leo said, for women's reproductive freedom. We continue to fight for reforms and the longer-term goal of women's liberation. And I'll stop there, and thank you very much for the opportunity.